Thanks, everybody. Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. Roy Sekoff was the founding editor of the Huffington Post, founder of HuffPost Live, and if anybody ever watches me interview famous people and wonders, how the hell did that guy up there? Well, he's one of the reasons. His new book, Lacks Self-Control, True Stories I Waited Till My Parents Died to Tell, is on shelves now, and he's right here, Roy Sekoff.
Unbelievable.
Right.
I'm to blame for this. This is partially. I can't take full blame.
There's many to blame. You know, my parents for one.
Sure. They started it off, but there was a day when you were actually not supposed to be an on-air person. You were supposed to be a special projects producer. Yep. And then the special project turned out to be giving you an on-camera career.
Consistently.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you so much for that.
I appreciate you being here.
Roy, so you, a couple years ago, you took off from the media industry, essentially. You were like, I'm done with new media. Fair enough. Fair. What made you write this book?
So basically, after 12 years of building HuffPost from 4 people to 800 people, I needed a little break. If you recall, he'll remember this, but I was commuting from Los Angeles to New York. I would fly on a Monday from LA into New York, work all week, and then Friday I'd fly back home. And then I'd come back the next week and they'd go, why are you tan? Like, well, I live in LA. Oh, I forgot that. So anyway, after 4 years of that, I needed a bit of a break, too many airports, so I took a year off where I just did nothing except for hang out with my daughter, drove her to school, and that was one of the reasons that I did take off. She had 2 more years of high school left, and I wanted to spend a little more time with her before she disappeared, as I knew would happen because my son vanished, you know? So I took a year where I wouldn't even allow a creative thought to come into my head.
You weren't writing at all?
Nothing. I wasn't doing anything. Even if a good idea came in, I wouldn't do anything. I said, no, I got to figure out who I am outside of HuffPost, because I had worked with Ariana for 17 years and worked at HuffPost for 12. And I said, okay, let me just figure that out. So after a year, I kind of had the itch to be creative again. Didn't know what the hell I was going to do. So I started making notes. Always a good way to avoid working, you know. Maybe I'll write a play. Maybe I'll write a screenplay. I don't know. But one of the things I thought was, you know, I've got these stories. I'm sure you have yours. You have yours. You know, the stories that you always tell. You go out, you have a few drinks, you start, may I say bullshitting? Bullshitting, and you know, you start bullshitting, and then suddenly, you know, you're telling that funny story about the time Chevy Chase grabbed your balls, or my balls, not yours, but and that one always Chapter 3, exactly. So basically, I thought, why don't I start with that? I've already told them, I kind of know them, and I'll just see what comes out. And once I decided to do that, it exploded. Just the stories I hadn't thought about for 40 years. I was waking up in the middle of the night every night, just writing down ideas. I wasn't writing yet. I was only writing down ideas for stories. And finally, I came home one day, and I was sitting outside, and 3 sentences popped into my head. The first sentences of the colonics story. I had a roommate who somehow talked me into doing high colonics. But so that was an adventure in itself. And the first 3 sentences popped in, and I said, I don't want to forget those. So I went in, stood at the computer for the first time with intention in a year, and I started writing, and I didn't stop for an hour. And after that hour, I looked it over and I went, I like that voice. And I went in and I said to my wife, I know what I'm going to do for the next 4 or 5 months. I'm just going to write these stories.
Now, after having worked for Ariana for 17 years and working and editing the Huffington Post for a number of years and then creating HuffPost Live, what did it feel like to find your voice again? Because I imagine you knew your voice all throughout those years, but you had been writing different things for different purposes, not necessarily just for yourself.
Right. It was all about building a brand that I was a part of, but wasn't me. You know, so it felt fantastic, you know, to sort of finally be writing in my voice and following my muse, if you will, you know, and it really did pour out of me. The one question I had, Ricky, was after 12 years of being on deadline, would I have the discipline without the deadline? And turns out I did. I developed.
Did you give yourself deadlines, or?
Yeah, well, I just said if I have it, I'm gonna make myself write every day, you know, and it turned out that I did. So I wrote every day. 8 to 10 hours a day, which is a lot, but I felt like I was trying to just keep up with my mind. Obviously, I talk real quick, and I think even quicker. So my brain was like, and I thought, I don't even know
8 to 10 hours a day you were writing?
Every day, yeah. And I was just...
breaks in there, or you just...
Yeah, you know, I mean, I would, you know, take a bathroom break now and then, middle-aged man, prostate issues. You know, you have to take a break now and then, but, and I ate.
Maybe book 2, obviously.
Book 2, prostate issues, that's the, yeah. And then I also would eat. I did nourish myself, and occasionally would work out because I didn't want to wither I didn't want to become a withered writer. But I did write every day, 6 days a week, 8 to 10 hours a day. And 10 weeks later, I had what became Black Self-Control.
You know, I just read an article about Philip Roth where it said the last, I think like from the 90s after his marriage dissolved to the point of retiring, he wrote 8 to 10 hours a day, refused to read anybody's books, refused to really read any books, and would just solely stand at his desk and write. Your book, I think in the way that it focuses on neurosis and parts of the body, I would say.
Burgeoning sexual development. Yes, that was a big part of the story.
Colonics. Has a bit of a, I would say, I wouldn't know if it follows in the footsteps of Philip Roth, but it definitely has a connection too.
Well, one of my happiest moments was when I asked, a couple people who had worked at HuffPost or as bloggers, and I asked Jay Roach.
Who worked at HuffPost, Jay Roach.
No, yeah. Jay Roach was one of the people, bloggers.
Assistant editor of Voices, Jay Roach.
Yes, no. He was fantastic at that. He really knew how to get people to blog. No, Jay, he did Austin Powers and Meet the Parents and Game Change, many other things. So I asked him to read it, and he, halfway through, wrote me and said, I'm loving this. And he ended up doing a blurb that said, it's a modern Portnoy's complaint, only way funnier. I could have died right then. It was a very happy moment. Then I really did die when Larry David gave me his blurb, which was, of course, I've read worse. High praise from Larry David,
It's true.
I mean, if Larry David had actually said anything nice, no one would have believed it. So I've read worse, I thought. When that came through on the email, I ran out and told my wife, I'm done. The happiest I could be.
Did you have any intention ever, or was there an urge within you to write about the creation of the Huffington Post or anything like that?
No, as a matter of fact, I kind of avoided it. That's not the story I wanted to write. I wanted to sort of just tell these other stories that I've been telling. I didn't want to, it was still too fresh. It was like I needed to let that simmer. That's probably going to be book 3.
I still do feel like that sort of period of time, the early to mid 2000s, and the sort of fostering of new media and new media voices. That story still hasn't really been told that well.
Because I've started to do a little bit of press. Nothing as good as this yet. No one's had this right here. But I've started, and everybody wants to know about HuffPost, so I'm more than happy to talk about it. And people are still very interested in that period, and it's really amazing how rapidly things have changed, even just in this period. You think back when we launched HuffPost, there was no Twitter, there was no Facebook, YouTube had only been around for 2 months. These things that are a seminal part of our day that we go to maybe too many times every day, they didn't even exist. So to talk about what it was like to sort of not invent blogging, but take blogging into this position where we had a massive group blog, which nobody had ever done before in that way.
SEO tagging feels like the old days at this point.
Well, right? I mean, in those days, it was like, what do you mean? It was a very dark arts, SEO, search optimization, what is that? A and B testing, how dare you? But look back on it, it's still very interesting. And it's interesting also when I travel, because certain places have not gotten as far as we have gotten. So I've spoken in Japan a couple times, and they're still asking me the same question, is this really journalism? And I'm like, 2005 again, having the same question. Israel had they had the same sort of questions, Really, are you really journalists? Because, especially HuffPost Live, as I don't know if you know, but when HuffPost Live, we would always bring in people via Google Hangouts and Skype, and we thought we could change, instead of having the same talking heads, David Gergen and the same 5 people that they have.
Now you see that on CNN. You see everybody's bringing people in on Skype or Google Hangouts. It's not like when we did it, we were laughed at a little bit because the quality wasn't there just yet, but it was way ahead of the curve.
But we always thought that the fact that it didn't look fantastic, for me, lended some authenticity to it. Because that's how we Skype with our friends. Grandma comes in on the FaceTimes. So to me, it was like, here's the comparison. It's a little bit like porn. How I always bring it back to that. But porn went through this phase where everything became amateur. That was, even if they were pros, they called it amateur. The family next door. But it had a raw...
Wait, what the fuck?
Well, yeah, come on. It had a rawness to it, is what I'm saying, that made it feel more authentic. Am I wrong about this? oh, nobody here looks at porn. Yeah, you porn only gets 8 billion views every year, but nobody here. It's just me and my pals. Everybody here is very pristine. Ricky Camilleri, never once look at porn. It's like red buttons.
That is not true. I'll admit. Yeah, of course.
Once.
Once. Yeah, just once.
Yeah.
I just wanted to see what this whole thing was about, and then I was like, no, thank you.
Overrated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not my thing.
Not your thing.
Not my thing.
Yeah. No, I'm not a big, porn meister. Actually, I find it to be actually sort of desultory and depressing most of the time, Yet somehow I keep going back. But, that is, there is sort of a through line in this book. One of the stories, the first story, is about when I was 12 and going through that phase, puberty, starting to understand these things, and I discovered my father's porn collection, and so that's the first story that I talk about, and it was.
I think most boys have had that moment. The father's collection or the neighbor's father's collection. Yes. Everybody, every boy kind of has that moment where you're like in a closet somewhere or a locker, and you're like, what is, oh my God.
Yes. Well, for me, it was like an archaeological dig. I was trying to find the porn equivalent of King Tut's tomb, and that turned out to be my dad's closet. I found it. I became like one of the great spies in the world. I knew how to leave everything exactly how it was, when they would go out, and I would venture in there. But I will say one thing that
you were specifically looking for the porn.
Yeah. Well, because he had a couple of the girly mags. Playboy and Penthouse, and the 70s were a glorious time for glossy men's magazines. There was Cherie and Oui and Penthouse and Playboy and Hustler, and it seemed like every week there was a new one. And once I discovered that, I thought, there's bigger game to be had. And I wanted to see if that was, in fact, available. And turns out my dad was a little bit of a erotica aficionado. Yeah, he was a connoisseur of the perverse. And so I stumbled onto that, and it probably ruined my life, but in many ways. But, I've worked...
It ruined most men's life.
Yes.
That moment of discovery at 12 was like, it's all downhill from here.
It was more than I was ready to deal with at that point, because I was also very anxious about being caught doing this thing that I shouldn't be doing, I'm invading my father's privacy, But you know what? Here's the thing, Ricky. I think we're being very misogynistic in two ways. One, we're...
Now?
Yes.
In this moment?
Let me explain why. The patriarchy needs to be shattered. Here's why. You keep saying that boys have had this experience, and boys do this, and I called it my father's porn collection, right? I'm not sure that it was just my dad's. I mean, who's to say that I would...
Fair.
I would imagine that it was something that he and my mom probably looked. I never asked, and I never delved. And by the way, this thought never popped into my head until after I'd finished the book. And I was talking about it to some people, and I went, that's kind of ridiculous of me to think that, my mother. So I sort of imagined, my mother was a real character. I read a couple of the things about her. She was very, very funny. And she was kind of in New York. She moved to Miami. I grew up in Miami, but she was kind of one of these, grew up in New York. And I could just imagine her saying, Roy, why were you so sure that it was just your father's porn? Sure. Every now and then we'd bring out the projector and have a little fun. It was like when I found out that they, smoked pot. My parents were kind of counterculture-y. My dad was born during the Depression, so they were older when the 60s happened, but they kind of saw themselves as sort of hipsters, My dad loved Lenny Bruce and
porn.
Well, I don't want to be presumptuous to say that he loved porn. He was fond of porn. Right. But perhaps my mother, when she told me, I said, Mom, do you guys smoke pot? And she was like, yeah, sure. Sometimes you don't feel like having a drink, And I remember there was one time, it was like the late 60s, and we had neighbors. They were kind of straight people, he was a butcher. And he came over one night with this little brown bag, and it had pot in it, but he didn't know that. He wanted to be sure, because he had 2 teenage daughters, and he had found this in their room. And he said to my dad, I know that you're kind of, my dad owned a college bookstore, so he was always around young people. And so he gave it to my dad, and my dad opened up the bag, and he looked at it and gave it a sniff, and he said, I'm going to have to keep this for further examination, Murray. you know, and so I'm sure they lit it up that night. So they were, you know, but anyway, that's my point, is that one of the things that's really surprised me pleasantly is that, you know, when I wrote the book, I thought, is this just, by the way, it's not all sex. There's only like 3 stories that are sex-based out of the 17. So there's many other stories that are of a non-pornographic nature.
Yes, that's true.
But and they're just as funny as the porn ones. But anyway, as I was writing it, I thought, is this kind of male-centric? Is this something that guys are going to relate to, but not women? But I've been stunned and thrilled that so far, you know, I've gotten 20 reviews by book bloggers and early reviewers on places like Goodreads and NetGalley. So far, 18 of the 20 were women. And not only have they loved the book, given it 4 and 5 stars, thank you, they have actually said, you know, I didn't have this exact experience, but I can really relate to it. I was going through many of the same things. I was, you know, my burgeoning sexuality, I was trying to figure it out. I figured out, found my dad's or mom's porn collection. So I was really intrigued by the fact that it's not just kind of a guy thing. You know?
How do kids find porn collections? It's like going through your dad's or your mother's, search history,
right.
Essentially.
Well, now it's worse. I mean, you know, as the father, I have two children. They've kind of made it through that era now. My son's is going to be 23 shortly, and my daughter's going to be 19. But I'm terrified and was terrified through these years because, you know, the not just easy availability, but it's right there. I mean, it's one click away. I mean, any deviant act, any level of pornography it's in your pockets right now. It's in your purses and in your pockets, right? It's one click away. And I don't think that's good. And I'm not somebody who in any way is prudish, as you know.
Not that anyone should feel shame for, like, you know, finding a collection or watching it. But yeah, it is strange that it is a click away.
Well, because it creates a false impression of what intimacy is really like, what eroticism is really like. You know, porn is not the real world. And I think it creates false expectations. It creates horrible things for, you know, women who are looking at it and going, I don't look like that. Guys who go, I don't look like that, you know, and should I be doing that? Is that the natural thing? It's interesting because
just a kind of impatience in terms of your sexuality and how you view sex and how much ease you think it should come to you with.
But I mean, I don't want to make this all about sex, but it actually is a fascinating study of what it's done to our culture and the impact that it's had on our culture. Not to get too graphic, but, you know, there are, let's say, grooming predilections that are radically different now than they were even 15 years ago. And not just for people in porn. It's across the board. I mean, from what I understand, what I've read, you know, high school girls are, you know, doing the Brazilians and all that kind of stuff. That's because the impact of porn. And people thought, should I look like that? Is that what it should be? And also, again, not to be too graphic for these people coming in, it's 12. I'm here for an afternoon. But there has been a rise in if you follow the studies, because I'm very academic about this. If you follow the studies, there's been a huge increase in people engaging in alternative forms of sexuality, anal sex, for instance. It's much wider accepted. It's accepted in a much wider way than it ever was.
This is something that I covered extensively at HuffPost Live.
Did you?
Yes.
And what did you discover this same thing?
We had a number of people on who said very similar things.
Well, you were on the famous interview with Stoya, right?
Yes.
And
well, I interviewed Stoya a couple times.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, Stoya is a porn star.
But she's sort of a...
She's also a writer.
She's a writer, and so Ricky kept asking her to come back. Please, at the end of an interview, can we have you again next week? And she was, you know, very honest and talked openly about her father.
It's amazing.
Finding her online, and it was one of our most popular interviews ever. But of course, no one watches porn. None of you have ever seen porn, but somehow Stoya got 2 million views.
Who would have thought? Yeah, my reason for booking her wasn't purely cynical based on numbers at all.
Pure clicks. Yeah, pure clicks. But anyway, so yeah, so it's something that people are interested in, and you know, it's a big part of our lives. So why not talk about it?
I want to go back to one thing about Huffington Post, because one thing that you did at Huffington Post when you were an editor there were headlines. You loved writing headlines.
Yeah.
It's one thing that I remember about you.
Yeah.
Do you miss getting the chance to write the headlines, especially with what's happening right now, when they're almost writing themselves and it's impossible to make them funny because they're just so tragic immediately?
You know, yeah, I mean, I always loved playing with words, and this gave me the chance to play with words in a bigger way. You know, turns of phrase, just trying to be witty and pithy. How much can you get together and just, you know, because in a headline you only have 4 or 5 words, you know? But, you know, it's interesting. For, I'd say 2008, 2009, 2010, I did the talking head thing on MSNBC and CNN, you know, maybe 2 or 3 times a week, HLN, Joy Behar show a lot. And everybody says to me now, do you miss it? I mean, my gosh, now, with everything that's happening, don't you wish you were on the air doing that? And I'm like, hell no. I am so happy not to be doing that because it's so bonkers, because I always tried to have a little bit of a funny take on things. What could I possibly ever say that would be as funny right bizarre now and funny in a very dark way as what's happening? I mean, that picture of Trump sitting there, you know, with his arms crossed and Angela Merkel leaning over and Trudeau in the background, it's like, if I had a comedy magazine, that's what I would have done. You know, the bratty boy.
It looks like a drawing.
It looks like Norman Rockwell gone funky, right? He's sitting there, it's like, I didn't steal the ice cream, and the cop is leaning in. You know, it seems exactly like that kind of thing. So I worship at the altar of Stephen Colbert and Samantha Bee and John Oliver. God bless them, more power to them. And I think they're doing fantastic work. I think this is actually an unbelievably ripe time for satire. And yet, I think that it's rarely been less useful. Mm-hmm. I mean, when Jonathan Swift, we'll go back to the beginning, you know, when he wrote his, you know, modest proposal, right? And his whole goal was to, you know, comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And he actually made a difference because he blew people's minds. You know, when he said, you know, well, what we should really do, you know, is cook and clean and eat Irish children. People are like, what? What are you saying? Oh, because of this. And it had this real impact. And I think that Lenny Bruce had a real impact. And I think that
the impact that Jon Stewart had for a period of time with The Daily Show.
There was that moment. But we've now become so separated. We've become so bifurcated. We've become so spread to the fringes of, you know, our positions that I hate to say it, but I don't think that it's breaking through the din. As good as their work is, they're preaching to the choir. You know, their fan base is already, ready to hate and ready to, you know, march there with their pitchforks and their torches.
Well, this takes me back to the beginning of our conversation, which is about HuffPost in 2005, 2006, leading up to the election of Obama, where you actually have this period of time where a left-leaning website could actually make an impact and a difference and bring people from the other side in, where, like you said, we're so bifurcated, and especially when it comes to satire, everybody's kind of doing it, even though they're doing it well. The only way to do something different would be to do something right-leaning, but who the hell wants that? Because there's no satire there.
And none of them are funny. They've tried it 100 times. It was always going to be the conservative Daily Show.
As we can see from Dennis Miller's current Twitter account.
Oh, or Mike Huckabee. Oh, geez, that's one of the most painful things. But one of the great things about HuffPost, as you say, there was kind of 2 things that happened. One was, you're all too young, but coming on the wave of the 2004 election, when Kerry lost to Bush for Bush's second term, progressives throughout the world, and particularly Los Angeles, were like, how the hell did that happen? You know, you remember the great sketch on Saturday Night Live where John Lovitz was playing Michael Dukakis and Dana Carvey was playing Bush the First, and they were having this debate, and at one point he turns to the camera, Dukakis, and goes, how am I losing to this guy? Well, that's what everybody thought. Like, so wait a minute. War hero John Kerry lost to cocaine-using ROTC war criminal George W. Bush by painting him as a coward? The war hero was painted as a coward, the swift boating thing. And people were like, how did this happen? And of course, one of the ways it happened was that the Republicans, the right, had developed this fantastic echo chamber. Right? Ideas would be developed at places like the Heritage Foundation, and then they would float out these papers, and they would sort of make their way to Drudge, and the Drudge report would splash, you know, whatever the topic of the day was, and then all the right-wing radio hosts would get their talking points from Drudge, and they had developed this incredibly powerful thing over the course of 30 years. And progressives were like, we're getting our ass kicked because of this internet thing. How can we combat this? And they looked at Howard Dean's run, which before the Remember the days?
Woo!
How quaint. Yeah, that killed the man's campaign. But stooping a porn star and grabbing the Nancy O'Dowd by the privates, that's fine. Just locker room talk. Yeah. But anyway, we looked at Dean and we said, you know, he had really used the internet really effectively before the meltdown and had raised incredible amounts of money. We thought, well, maybe the internet is the way that we could truncate that 30-year period. And Kenny Lair, one of the co-founders of HuffPost, very smart guy and very prescient, had said something that always stuck with me. He said, you know, 20 years ago, it took 20 years to build a brand. 10 years ago, it took 10 years to build a brand. Now, you could build a brand in a year if you do it right. And he was right, because we launched HuffPost May 9th, 2005, and by November, Jay Leno did a joke, and the punchline was Huffington Post. It meant enough as a brand that he could get a laugh off of the fact that it stood for something. And that's the other thing, is that the thing that was different, I think the thing that was really radical about HuffPost was it wasn't afraid to have a point of view. Right? We talked about this back in the day. You know, most news is very commodity news, right? CNN, AP. If you take, you know, most of these outlets and you take away all the branding and you take away all the design and you just look at the headlines, you'd go, I don't know. Is this CNN? I don't know. Could be AP. You know. Whereas my premise always was back in the day that if you took away all the branding and you took away all the design and you just read the headlines, you'd go, that's a HuffPost story. Because it wasn't afraid to have attitude. We weren't afraid to have fun. You know, we tried to do fun stuff with our headlines while still being very serious about what we were writing about. So, you know, we were serious, but we didn't take ourselves too seriously.
Sort of like a left-leaning New York Post at times as well in terms of the headlines. I mean, that's the way that I look back on it, and I mean that as a compliment. I mean,
and I take it as a compliment, but what we, again, too young, but Esquire in the 60s was famous for having these unbelievable covers, these images that would just stay with you. Muhammad Ali with the arrow sticking out of him, you know, and Sonny Liston with the Santa hat on, and the very just stark black cover with white words when they were writing about My Lai. So obviously they did that once a month. You can do, you know, fantastic things. We changed our covers, you know, we called them the splashes. We changed them 5-6 times a day. But every now and then, we would want to have sort of an objective correlative, you know, an image that would just sort of stay with you. And I remember one of the ones in the early days was when Alberto Gonzalez, who was the Attorney General under Bush, he was called before Congress to talk about some issue, and he said, I don't recall 187 times over the course of his testimony. So what we did was we took a little picture of Alberto, and we just put that picture 187 times. And the headline was, I don't recall. And it sort of was very powerful and impactful. So those are the kind of things that we tried to do. I remember in the later years, one that I was very, very proud of was there had been a ruling where they were trying to roll back abortion rights. And we were trying to think of what could we do to make a statement about that. Because there was the danger that they were going to, you know, as you see, abortion clinics closing down all across the country. There's some states where there's only one clinic, and you have to drive 500 miles. So we wanted to make a statement about that. And what we did was we just took a picture of a wire hanger against a white background with no words.
I believe I was there.
Yes.
I was at HuffPost when that happened. That was like a really, I thought it was brilliant. It was a really ballsy, I shouldn't say that in regards to this headline. It was a really dangerous thing to do.
Yeah, and it blew up. I mean, within 5 minutes of it, you know, hitting, they were doing stories. How dare you? And
shocking, but right. It was the right thing to do.
Because I think shocking is not bad. I mean, I think shocking sometimes can, you know, shock you into your senses. You know, you could be shocked by the horror of something. I mean, I find it shocking. I hope we all do. What's happening at the border with, you know, children being pulled away from their parents and put in what amount to cages. And the story today, I can't even believe we're living in these times, but today there was a story that they are telling the parents that they're taking the kids for a shower. when did that ever happen before in history? Let's see. People being told they were going to the showers. Dachau, Buchenwald. Yeah. So I hope that shocks the senses of this country. I hope it shocks the senses of the people in Congress and in the Senate who are seemingly unable to or unwilling to do anything about it.
One more question about media before I turn to audience questions, and I'm sure those are going to be
much funnier.
About the book.
Much funnier.
Funnier,
Abortion, yeah. Buchenwald. Way to sell the book, Sekoff. Oh, I can see my publishers going.
No, but do you think, we were talking about how HuffPost and the left were part of this kind of like use of the internet following the echo chamber that led to Bush elected in 2004. Do you think that, and I'll say we because I consider myself a part of the quote unquote left, whatever the hell that actually means according to whoever's using the word now. Yeah. But do you see us as having gotten beat at the same game in this last election?
I think it was much deeper than that. I mean, obviously, yeah. There's no question that the use of media, but particularly social media, had a massive impact. And we haven't even peeled back the layers of the onion on exactly Cambridge Analytica, the group in Israel, So I don't think that we got beat at the new media game, but I think the American people got beat with the social media game and how that was played, and how we were all played using it.
Let's get a question. Who's got a question? Right here.
Hi. I'm just curious, being able to transition from media into getting to write a book, was it easier for you after being out of the game for so long?
The great thing, the one gift that I had, and I have, the owners of this facility to thank, is that, HuffPost was a success, and it was good. And I didn't make enough money to retire. I didn't make enough to never worry about it again, but I had a little bit of breathing room. So I was actually able to write the book without worrying, is this going to sell? Am I going to be able to feed my kids? Am I going to be able, I had the freedom to write something crappy. I had the freedom to risk being bad and not working.
But you didn't write
But
something.
It turns out
okay,
I didn't write anything crappy. I wrote something fantastically funny, which I think we need nowadays.
Your poor publishers, I didn't want to leave you with I had the freedom to write something crappy and then move on to the next question.
But I didn't. But so it gave me that freedom to just write what I wanted to write, to find out what my voice was, and to suddenly look up and go, hey, you know what? This works, And so it wasn't that difficult to transition, but I certainly was nervous because I had never done anything quite this personal. I mean, the subtitle of this book, as you can see, is, why am I picking up the book? There's a 12-foot rendering of it.
It's natural.
By the way, you know what an Easter egg is, where you hide something like sort of in a video game? This at the bottom of the book, and that is my wife in kindergarten. So that's a lovely little treat to my lovely wife of 25 years, Tammy. But anyway, the subtitle is True Stories I Waited Until My Parents Died to Tell. And that's it. That's what these are. They're all true, and they all really happened, and they're all sort of pushing the envelope in a way that, By the way, my parents both had hysterical senses of humor. My dad, his nickname was the Big A. His name was Arthur. They called him the Big A because he had a big personality. I think that, I didn't have to wait till they died to tell it. They would have loved it. I think they would have been proud of me. At least I hope so. Mom, Dad, yes, maybe, lightning bolt, no hit.
One more. What do we got?
Hi. I was just curious, while you were writing this book, were you concerned about the stories that your children will find out eventually, or certain stories that you just didn't put in the book?
I'm so glad you asked that question. Fantastic question. I had two goals when I was writing the book. I wanted to be as funny as I was capable of being, and I wanted to be as honest as I was capable of being. And that meant, pushing boundaries, pushing through things that were, and by the way, I'm the brunt of most of the jokes in the book. To me, that's comedy, right? It's not like, this is a great thing that I did. It's usually, I'm a schmuck. I thought something good was going to happen. It didn't turn out. That to me is the root of comedy, at least the Semitic form of humor, the New York Jew form of humor. It kind of comes to. But I married a lovely. So I'm a culturally Jewish fellow from Miami, which was really New York South. until it became Havana North. But when I was growing up, it was basically that. And I kind of live out loud. I've always lived, very open. And I've always talked about things that, even in high school, we just had I don't want to say what year it was, 40. Just had my 40-year high school reunion, and a lot of people were like, you were always like this. You always said things that, made the teachers go, oh, Roy, get out of here. Oh, by the way, that's the title of the book. It's called Lack Self-Control, because that is what I got written on every report card from kindergarten until 9th grade. Every single grading period, my teachers would write, Roy says that he's going to behave better, but he really needs to learn self-control. Roy lacks self-control. We really wish Roy would shut up. He would sit still. There's this whole thing. And in the beginning, I'm going to double back to your answer. I took that as a scarlet letter. I felt bad about it. I'm a behavioral issue. I have problems, But as I grew older, I realized that for me, and by the way, that doesn't mean just acting on whatever impulse you have. For me, lacking self-control means, you don't have to follow inside the lines. You don't have to do what they tell you to do. Springsteen has that great line, when they said sit down, I stood up, ooh, growing up, And so that's what I learned, is that I think life is much more rewarding and rich if you sort of sing your song, say what you feel, and, take the consequences. But to get back to what you said about my kids and my wife, I married a lovely Catholic girl from the Midwest. She does not live her life in the same outrageous, unfiltered way that I do. So I would tell her what I was writing, and she would kind of give me one of those, really? And I said, don't censor me. We could decide not to publish that story later, but don't do it now, Don't
make me second guess myself. I have to get through this.
Yeah, let me just write it, and then we could go, oh, God, that's embarrassing, And she was like, I hope you're not writing about me with that kind of, And that's really not her voice, by the way. She's a lovely, lovely person. But, and then the issue of kids did come up, what are my kids going to think? My son's 23. My daughter's going to be 19. And, maybe they shouldn't read all of the stories. But I have to say, I'm very pleased that the vibe got out there that maybe I was being too outrageous, that maybe I'd gone too far. Thanks, honey, for putting that out there. And my daughter got this thing like, Dad, are my friends going to read this? Am I going to be embarrassed to go to school? And I'm like, no, it's not. It's not like that. And so a couple weeks ago, I recorded the audio version. I went into the studio for 3 days, read all the stories. And when I got the thing, I said, I want to get your opinion on... So I read I played one of the less outrageous stories. And she's like, Dad, I really like this. This is really funny. So I said, let me play you another and another. And I kept playing it, and she went, you know what? I really love this. This is really fantastic. I'm really proud of you. And
you unlocked the door and let her out of the room.
Well, of course. And I took the shackles off and the bunny, But so at the end of the day, I'm really excited about people reading it. And I will say that I've been a little bit relieved that the first, as I said, 20 reviews have all been positive. And maybe to end on this, is what I've been happiest about is, sure, they've said the things I would want them to say. Hilarious, laugh out loud. People looked at me strange because I was reading it on the bus and laughing out loud. Great. But the thing that's made me the most happy is that many, many of the reviewers have also said, by the end of the book, I felt like I was friends with Roy. I could really relate. I really like this guy. He's saying things in a way that are outrageous, but are good at heart. So I think that's been the most satisfying thing. The one that just came out yesterday was, the review started, Dear Roy, can I be your friend IRL, in real life? And
get in touch with them?
I immediately said, done. Anybody who likes my book, you could be my friend. Well, I'm very easy in that way, Ricky. I'm very easy, very cheap, and I will go anywhere to talk about this book. Not to say this is anywhere. This is...
Oh, yeah. What the hell was that?
This is everywhere. This is the peak. I got to say, this has been a real treat.
It's a homecoming. It's really nice to have you. It's
I mean,
really
I'm
nice
looking
to see you,
around.
Roy.
The
It's
person who
great.
put my makeup on, yes, this is not normal. This is, I got a little help here.
Mine is normal.
Yeah, she had been the makeup person on HuffPost Live, and Jessica was one of our producers, and Karen was the head salesperson. So this is so wonderful for me. It feels a little bit like coming home.
Roy, the book is hilarious. Fantastic. Congratulations. It's on shelves now. People can pick it up or on Amazon?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow?
It launches tomorrow. Amazon, available, and Barnes & Noble and all the other places. But on Amazon, it's on Kindle. There's a paperback. There's a hardback. And Audible, the audiobook will be, they're a little late, but they should be coming up in the next 4 or 5 days. Yeah. So, give it a look. Download it, read it, leave a review, send me an email, roysekoff.com, and I would love to hear what you think.
Roy Sekoff, everybody.
Oh, thank you so much.